The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Thomas adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. At 22, he was the youngest member of the Royal Guard, a position that filled him with immense pride but also constant anxiety about making mistakes. The golden buttons on his red tunic gleamed as he took his position beside the main entrance, his rifle held at perfect attention. Princess Isabella was scheduled to attend the charity gala that evening, and security preparations had been underway for weeks. Thomas had memorized every detail of the security briefing, every face of the approved personnel, every entrance and exit route. His commanding officer, Captain Morrison, had specifically chosen him for this prestigious post, despite some senior guards questioning whether someone so young could handle such responsibility. The palace grounds buzzed with activity as event coordinators, florists, and catering staff moved in and out of the building. Thomas watched each person carefully, checking identification badges and maintaining the serious demeanor expected of a royal guard. His mother had been so proud when he received this assignment, telling everyone in their small village about her son protecting the royal family. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed a young boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, lingering near the service entrance. The child wore simple clothes and kept glancing toward the guard post where Thomas stood. At first, Thomas assumed the boy was simply curious about the palace activities, as many local children often were when special events took place. The boy approached Thomas 3 times throughout the afternoon, each time being politely but firmly turned away. Palace protocol was clear about unauthorized individuals, especially children, being near the premises during high-security events. Thomas explained kindly but firmly that the boy needed to move along and find his parents. However, something about the child's behavior began to trouble Thomas. The boy didn't seem like a typical curious youngster. Instead of running off to play or losing interest, he kept returning, his eyes darting nervously between Thomas and various areas of the palace grounds. There was an urgency in his movements that didn't match his young age. During the boy's 4th approach, Thomas noticed the child's hands were shaking slightly, and he kept looking over his shoulder as if checking to see if someone was watching him. When Thomas asked if he was lost or needed help finding his parents, the boy shook his head quickly and mumbled something about needing to tell someone something important. The palace grounds had grown busier as evening approached, with more staff arriving for the gala preparations. Thomas found himself torn between his duty to maintain his post and a growing concern about this persistent child. Every instinct told him that something wasn't quite right about the situation. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the palace walls, the boy made his 5th approach. This time he walked more slowly, his small frame seeming to carry a burden too heavy for his age. Thomas could see tears forming in the child's eyes, and the boy's voice cracked slightly when he asked if he could please speak to someone about something very important that might hurt people. Thomas felt his heart rate increase as he looked at the frightened child before him. The boy's genuine fear was unmistakable, and Thomas realized that whatever was troubling this young person might be far more serious than a simple case of childhood curiosity. The weight of his responsibility as a royal guard suddenly felt much heavier as he considered what his next move should be. Thomas knelt down to the boy's eye level, breaking protocol slightly but following his instincts. The child's face was pale and his small hands clutched a crumpled piece of paper. When Thomas gently asked what was wrong, the boy looked around nervously before whispering that he had seen some men talking about hurting people at the party tonight. The boy's name was Jamie, and he lived with his grandmother in the village just outside the palace grounds. He had been playing near the old storage buildings behind the marketplace when he overheard 3 men discussing plans that made his stomach feel sick. Jamie explained that the men didn't see him because he had hidden behind some wooden crates, but he heard them clearly. According to Jamie, the men had talked about the princess's schedule and mentioned specific times and locations within the palace. They had discussed creating a distraction during the gala and had mentioned something about the service tunnels that connected the old part of the palace to the new wing. The boy's voice trembled as he recounted hearing one man say that after tonight, things would be very different. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to Jamie's account. The service tunnels were known only to senior staff and security personnel, and they were supposed to be sealed during high-security events. The fact that outsiders knew about them was deeply concerning. He asked Jamie to describe the men and the boy provided surprisingly detailed descriptions, including one man's distinctive scar and another's unusual accent. The paper in Jamie's hand contained a rough drawing he had made of the men and some words he had managed to write down phonetically. Thomas could see that despite his young age, Jamie was intelligent and observant. The boy had even noted the time when he overheard the conversation and had tried to remember as many details as possible. Thomas's mind raced as he considered his options. Protocol dictated that he should remain at his post and radio for backup to investigate the boy's claims. However, something about Jamie's genuine terror convinced him that time might be running out. The gala was set to begin in just 2 hours, and if there was any truth to what the boy had heard, every minute could be crucial. Captain Morrison was conducting a final security sweep in the East Wing, and the radio channels were busy with pre-event coordination. Thomas knew that trying to explain a child's story over the radio might not receive the urgent attention it deserved, especially with so many other security concerns taking precedence. Jamie tugged on Thomas's sleeve and pointed toward the old marketplace area where he had hidden. The boy pleaded with Thomas to come and see the place where the men had been talking, explaining that there might be more evidence there. He mentioned seeing one of the men drop something that looked important. Thomas looked at his post, then back at the frightened child before him. His training told him one thing, but his conscience told him another. The boy's story was too detailed and his fear too genuine to ignore. If there was even a small chance that Jamie had uncovered a real threat to the princess and the other guests, Thomas knew he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. Making a decision that would change everything, Thomas told Jamie to stay close to him. He quickly checked his radio and weapon, then made the choice to temporarily leave his assigned position to investigate the boy's claims. As they walked toward the marketplace, Thomas prayed that he was making the right decision, and that his instincts about this young witness were correct. The marketplace was unusually quiet for late afternoon, with most vendors already packing up their stalls in preparation for the evening's festivities. Jamie led Thomas through narrow pathways between wooden structures, his small feet moving quickly despite his obvious nervousness. The boy occasionally stopped to look around, making sure they weren't being followed. Behind the largest storage building, Jamie pointed to a collection of old wooden crates stacked against the wall. He whispered that this was where he had hidden when he heard the men talking. Thomas examined the area carefully, noting that it provided an excellent hiding spot, while also offering a clear view of the small clearing where conversations could easily be overheard. On the ground near the crates, Thomas discovered fresh cigarette butts and the remains of a small fire that had been hastily extinguished. Someone had definitely been using this location recently, and the evidence suggested it had been more than just casual visitors. Thomas carefully collected the cigarette butts, thinking they might provide valuable evidence later. Jamie crept forward and pointed to a spot near a fallen log where he said one of the men had been sitting. There, partially buried under some leaves, Thomas found a folded piece of paper that appeared to be a hand-drawn map of the palace grounds. The map was surprisingly detailed and showed not only the main buildings but also the service tunnels and security checkpoints that were supposed to be confidential information. The discovery of the map confirmed Thomas's worst fears about the legitimacy of Jamie's story. Someone had clearly spent considerable time planning something that involved intimate knowledge of palace security. Red marks on the map indicated specific locations, including the grand ballroom where the gala was to be held and several exit routes that would allow someone to escape quickly. Thomas studied the map more closely and noticed timing notations written in the margins. The numbers corresponded exactly to the scheduled events of the evening, including the princess's planned arrival time and the moment when she would be giving her speech to the gathered guests. Whoever had created this map knew the detailed schedule of the evening's events. Jamie tugged on Thomas's sleeve and pointed to another area near the storage building. The boy explained that this was where he had seen one of the men hide something before they left. Together, they searched the area and discovered a small canvas bag hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the old wooden structure. Inside the bag, Thomas found items that made his blood run cold. There were detailed photographs of the palace interior, including pictures of the ballroom, the kitchen areas, and the service entrances. More disturbing were the photographs of palace staff members, including several pictures of guards in their uniforms and what appeared to be a schedule of guard rotations. Among the photographs was a picture of Thomas himself, taken without his knowledge while he was on duty. The sight of his own image in what was clearly a surveillance collection made him realize how serious and well-planned this threat truly was. These people had been watching the palace and its security for weeks, possibly months. The bag also contained a list of names, some of which Thomas recognized as palace staff members. Next to each name were notes about their schedules, family members, and what appeared to be personal information that could be used for blackmail or coercion. The level of detail was frightening and suggested a very sophisticated operation. As Thomas examined the evidence, Jamie stood watch, occasionally glancing toward the palace to make sure they weren't missing anything important. The boy's courage impressed Thomas, especially considering how frightened he clearly was about the whole situation. Despite his young age, Jamie seemed to understand the gravity of what they had discovered. The sun was setting rapidly, and Thomas knew that time was running out before the gala began. He carefully repacked the evidence and told Jamie that they needed to get back to the palace immediately. As they prepared to leave their hiding spot, Thomas heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching the marketplace area, and his heart began to race as he realized they might not be alone. Thomas quickly pulled Jamie behind the largest storage building as the sound of vehicle doors slamming echoed through the marketplace. Peering carefully around the corner, he saw 3 men emerging from a dark van, their faces matching the descriptions Jamie had provided earlier. One man had a prominent scar running down his left cheek, while another spoke with the foreign accent the boy had mentioned. The men moved with purpose toward the exact location where Thomas and Jamie had just discovered the hidden evidence. It was clear they had returned to collect their materials before putting their plan into action. Thomas's heart pounded as he realized how close they had come to being discovered by these dangerous individuals. Jamie pressed close to Thomas, his small body trembling with fear as they watched the men search frantically through the area where they had hidden their supplies. The scarred man cursed loudly when he realized their cache was missing, and his voice carried the anger of someone whose carefully laid plans had been disrupted. Thomas carefully activated his radio, keeping the volume as low as possible while trying to contact palace security. However, the radio crackled with interference, possibly due to their location behind the metal storage buildings or because someone was deliberately jamming the frequencies. He knew they were on their own and needed to find another way to warn the palace about the imminent threat. The 3 men split up to search the immediate area, clearly looking for whoever had discovered their hidden materials. Thomas knew that he and Jamie needed to move quickly before they were found. The nearest palace entrance was several hundred yards away across open ground, making a direct approach dangerous and likely impossible without being seen. Thomas remembered a maintenance pathway that ran along the eastern wall of the palace grounds, partially hidden by overgrown hedges and decorative stonework. It would provide some cover for their approach, though it would take longer to reach the main security checkpoint. With the evidence bag secured in his jacket and Jamie staying close behind him, they began their careful journey back to safety. As they moved through the shadows, Thomas could hear the men calling to each other, their voices growing closer as they expanded their search. One man mentioned that they needed to move forward with their plan, regardless of the missing materials, suggesting that the threat to the gala was still very real and immediate. Halfway along the maintenance path, Jamie stumbled over a loose stone, creating a small noise that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet evening air. Both Thomas and the boy froze, listening intently for any sign that they had been heard. After several tense moments, they continued their careful progress toward the palace. Thomas's mind raced as he considered the best way to alert palace security about the threat without causing a panic that might actually help the intruders. The evidence they had collected was compelling, but convincing the security team to take immediate action based on a child's story and some found materials might prove challenging, especially with the gala about to begin. As they neared the palace walls, Thomas could see the lights beginning to illuminate the building for the evening's festivities. Luxury vehicles were already arriving, and guests in elegant clothing were making their way toward the main entrance. The sight of the gathering crowd made the urgency of their situation even more apparent. Jamie pointed toward a small service gate in the eastern wall that appeared to be unguarded. Thomas knew this entrance was typically used only by maintenance staff and was supposed to be secured during events like the gala. The fact that it appeared to be accessible suggested either a security oversight or, more troubling, that it might be part of the intruders' planned route into the palace. As they approached the service gate, Thomas noticed that the electronic lock appeared to have been tampered with, confirming his worst fears about the sophistication of the threat they were facing. The intruders had already begun implementing their plan, and time was running out to prevent whatever they had scheduled for the evening's events. Thomas examined the tampered lock more closely and discovered that someone had used sophisticated electronic equipment to override the security system. Thin wires were visible where the casing had been carefully opened, and a small device was still attached to the internal mechanisms. This level of technical expertise confirmed that they were dealing with professionals, not amateur criminals. Using his security key, Thomas was able to access the service gate, but he made sure to document the evidence of tampering with his phone camera before they proceeded. Jamie stayed close behind him as they entered the palace grounds through the compromised entrance, both of them aware that they might be walking into a trap. The service corridors of the palace were dimly lit and unusually quiet, which struck Thomas as odd, given the busy preparations that should have been taking place for the gala. As they moved through the narrow hallways, Thomas began to suspect that other security measures might have been compromised as well. They encountered Sarah Mitchell, a senior palace administrator, hurrying through the corridor with an armload of documents. When Thomas tried to explain the situation to her, she initially seemed skeptical about the story of a young boy uncovering a security threat. However, when Thomas showed her the evidence they had collected, her expression quickly changed to one of serious concern. Sarah immediately used her radio to contact Captain Morrison, but like Thomas's earlier attempts, the communication was filled with static and interference. She explained that there had been several unexplained technical problems throughout the afternoon, including issues with the security camera system and problems with some of the electronic locks. The pattern of technical failures was becoming clear to Thomas. The intruders had been systematically disabling palace security systems throughout the day, preparing for their evening operation. The sophistication of their approach suggested they had inside knowledge of the palace's security infrastructure. Jamie, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, suddenly grabbed Thomas's arm and pointed down the corridor. He whispered that he could see one of the men from the marketplace walking toward them, apparently having gained access to the palace through another route. Thomas quickly guided Jamie and Sarah into a nearby storage room, closing the door quietly behind them. Through the small window, they watched as the scarred man from the marketplace walked confidently down the corridor, dressed now in what appeared to be catering staff, clothing complete with proper identification badges. The sight of the intruder, moving freely through the palace corridors, confirmed Thomas's worst fears about the scope of the security breach. These people had not only planned their operation carefully, but had also somehow obtained legitimate-looking credentials that allowed them to blend in with the authorized staff. Sarah used her master key to access a secure telephone line from the storage room, finally managing to reach Captain Morrison directly. As she quickly explained the situation, Thomas could hear the captain's voice rising with concern and urgency. Within minutes, Morrison was dispatching additional security personnel to begin a systematic search of the palace. While Sarah coordinated with security, Thomas studied the map they had found more carefully. He noticed that the timing notations corresponded not just to the princess's schedule, but specifically to the moment when she would be presenting awards to several young charity volunteers. This would be when she would be most stationary and surrounded by the largest crowd. Jamie pointed to another mark on the map that Thomas had initially overlooked. It appeared to show the location of the palace's main electrical systems, suggesting that the intruders might be planning to create chaos by cutting power to the building during the crucial moment of their operation. The pieces of the plot were becoming clearer, and Thomas realized that they had uncovered something much more serious than a simple theft or vandalism. This was a coordinated attack on the royal family that had been planned with military precision and inside knowledge. The evidence suggested that the intruders intended to use the charity gala as the perfect opportunity to carry out their plan while surrounded by innocent civilians who would complicate any response by security forces. Captain Morrison arrived at their location within minutes, accompanied by Detective Inspector Helen Walsh from the Metropolitan Police's Special Protection Unit. Morrison's usually calm demeanor showed signs of stress as he examined the evidence Thomas and Jamie had collected, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing the professional nature of the threat they were facing. Inspector Walsh knelt down to speak with Jamie directly, her gentle but thorough questioning, revealing additional details that the boy had remembered since their initial discovery. Jamie recalled seeing a fourth person, a woman who had been watching from a distance while the three men planned their operation. He described her as having red hair and wearing the uniform of palace cleaning staff. The description of the woman matched that of Maria Santos, a recently hired cleaning supervisor who had passed all background checks but whose employment had begun just 6 weeks ago. Inspector Walsh immediately radioed for Maria's current location and discovered that she was scheduled to be working in the ballroom area during the gala. Set up? Thomas felt a surge of pride, mixed with anxiety as he watched the professional response his discovery had triggered. But he also felt the weight of responsibility for having left his assigned post. Captain Morrison seemed to read his thoughts and quietly assured him that his decision to investigate had likely prevented a catastrophe. The palace was quickly and discreetly placed under enhanced security protocols without alerting the gathering guests to the potential danger. Additional plainclothes officers were positioned throughout the building, and all staff credentials were being re-verified through secure channels that bypassed the potentially compromised communication systems. Inspector Walsh explained that the evidence suggested a kidnapping attempt rather than an assassination plot. The timing, the planned power outage, and the detailed escape routes all pointed to an operation designed to capture the princess during the chaos and confusion of a darkened ballroom filled with panicked guests. Jamie's grandmother arrived at the palace after being contacted by the police, her face showing both worry for her grandson and amazement at the important role he had played in uncovering the plot. The elderly woman hugged Jamie tightly while thanking Thomas repeatedly for listening to her grandson, when others might have dismissed a child's concerns. As the gala officially began, the enhanced security team had identified and quietly detained 2 of the 3 men from the marketplace. The scarred man had been found attempting to access the electrical systems exactly as the map had indicated, while his accomplice had been discovered placing small explosive devices designed to create confusion rather than cause serious harm. The third suspect and Maria Santos remained at large within the palace, making the evening extremely tense for the security team. Princess Isabella had been briefed on the situation and had courageously decided to proceed with the gala while working closely with her protection detail to minimize risks. Thomas was reassigned to provide close protection for Jamie and his grandmother, who were being kept in a secure area of the palace until the remaining suspects could be located. Despite his young age, Jamie continued to provide valuable insights, remembering additional details about conversations he had overheard that helped the security team anticipate the intruder's likely next moves. The ballroom filled with elegantly dressed guests who remained unaware of the drama unfolding around them. Princess Isabella moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting attendees while her protection team maintained constant vigilance. The charity awards ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than an hour, representing the most vulnerable moment when the princess would be stationary on stage. Inspector Walsh coordinated the search for the remaining suspects while ensuring that the gala could continue without causing panic among the innocent guests. The success of their operation depended on maintaining the appearance of normalcy while conducting a thorough manhunt within the confines of an active social event. Every member of the security team understood that the next hour would determine whether Jamie's brave actions had truly prevented a disaster. The breakthrough came when Jamie suddenly remembered seeing the red-haired woman near the palace kitchen earlier that day, not in cleaning clothes, but in what looked like catering uniforms. Inspector Walsh immediately coordinated with the head chef to identify all catering staff, and they quickly discovered that Maria Santos had somehow obtained credentials for both cleaning and catering positions. Security cameras that were still functioning captured Maria moving through the service areas toward the ballroom's backstage entrance, carrying what appeared to be serving equipment but moving with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission rather than routine duties. The timing coincided perfectly with the scheduled start of the awards ceremony. Thomas, still protecting Jamie and his grandmother, watched through a security monitor as plainclothes officers quietly positioned themselves around the ballroom. Princess Isabella was about to take the stage when Inspector Walsh made the decision to intercept Maria before she could reach her intended position. The confrontation happened in the service corridor behind the ballroom stage. Maria Santos attempted to flee when approached by security, but her path was blocked by officers who had anticipated her escape routes based on the map Jamie had helped discover. In her possession, they found a sophisticated communications device and what appeared to be a small dart gun loaded with a powerful sedative. The third male suspect was located hiding in the palace wine cellar, apparently waiting for a signal from his accomplices before making his move toward the electrical systems. His capture completed the roundup of the immediate threat, though Inspector Walsh cautioned that the investigation would need to determine if there were additional conspirators who had not yet been identified. Princess Isabella was informed of the successful resolution just moments before taking the stage for the award ceremony. Her relief was visible to those who knew what had transpired, but she maintained her composure perfectly as she addressed the gathered guests and presented awards to young volunteers who, like Jamie, had shown extraordinary courage and civic responsibility. During her speech, Princess Isabella made a special mention of the importance of young people speaking up when they notice something wrong, never imagining that her words were particularly relevant to events that had just unfolded. Jamie watched from the secure viewing area, his face beaming with pride at the indirect recognition of his crucial role in the evening's events. The investigation that followed revealed that the kidnapping plot had been planned for over 8 months, with the conspirators gradually infiltrating palace operations through various cover identities. The level of planning and resources involved suggested backing by a sophisticated criminal organization, though the specific motives remained under investigation. Captain Morrison personally commended Thomas for his decision to trust Jamie's story and investigate despite the breach of protocol. The captain noted that Thomas's willingness to listen to a child and act on his instincts had demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and initiative that the Royal Guard valued in its members. Jamie became a local hero when the story eventually became public, with numerous news outlets praising the young boy's courage and observational skills. More importantly, the incident led to significant improvements in palace security protocols, including better procedures for handling reports from civilians and enhanced background checking for all personnel. 6 months later, Thomas was promoted to senior guard and assigned to train new recruits, with special emphasis on the importance of remaining alert to unusual circumstances, regardless of their source. Jamie visited him regularly at the palace, their friendship having been forged through shared experience of that dangerous evening. The boy's grandmother often reminded visitors to their small village that sometimes the most important messages come from the most unexpected sources, and that adults would do well to listen carefully when children have something important to say. Jamie's story became a reminder that heroism often comes in small packages, and that paying attention to subtle signs of danger can prevent much larger disasters. Princess Isabella established a special recognition program for young citizens who demonstrate exceptional awareness and civic responsibility, with Jamie as the first recipient. The award ceremony took place in the same ballroom where his actions had prevented a kidnapping attempt, bringing the story full circle in a celebration of courage, vigilance, and the power of speaking up when something doesn't seem right.